Hello, I'm Dr. Jodi Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive.
It's really lovely to see online that when you're Dr. Happy, and that's how we all know and love you, but you do share that Dr. Happy isn't happy all the time. Can you tell us a little bit about the fact that you have your own ups and downs like everybody else does?
Yeah, sure. Before I was Dr. Happy, I was Dr. Miserable. I've experienced quite severe depression on and off for pretty much all my adult life. Before I even knew what it was, before we spoke about these things, in fact, it really wasn't spoken about when I was really at my worst and when I was younger, I suppose. This is before Are You OK Day and before Movember and before Beyond Blue and all those things. So I didn't really know what was going on. My parents didn't really know what was going on. No one really did. Even doctors and psychologists probably didn't know as much back then. And I certainly didn't speak much about it. But as I got more confident, I suppose, and as the movement of speaking out and sharing lived experiences has grown and grown, which I think is a fantastic thing, I've been much more comfortable sharing my experiences. And I think it's important because I think the more of us that speak out, the less lonely other people feel, the less stigma there is. So, as much as I've focused on trying to promote positive psychology and help people be happy, and look, I am happy some of the time, more often than not these days, I suppose. But yeah, my depression still rears its pretty ugly head at times. And again, I think it's important that I speak about it so that people have realistic expectations, not just of me, but for themselves and for everyone.
I love that you've found that you've been able to, look, times have changed. Certainly more people are open. And I think too, as adults, we develop our comfortability sharing, don't we? And have you found that in sharing that you had a really positive response from the people who are in your world personally as well as professionally?
100%. And that's for a couple of reasons, though. I suppose I didn't really share until the movement was, starting to become established. So, it was certainly a lot easier if I'd come out a lot earlier. Well, I don't think I would have got a negative response then, but I think there would have just been a lot less, more ignorance, less awareness, I suppose. In fact, but I still remember that the first time I came out technically or formally, and my immediate family and knew about it because, they'd seen and lived it for years and years, I suppose. But at one point, quite a few years ago now, I decided to formally come out because I'd started to sort of dabble in sharing my story. And so I sent an email to my, I guess what I would consider my closest circle of friends, so my immediate family knew. And I basically just said, I'm going to be starting to talk more publicly about this. You might see or hear something. But, I wanted to tell you first, basically, that my depression's been ongoing. It's quite severe at times. And not only did I get a positive response, a supportive response, but what surprised me in a way is that I got a response full of shock and surprise, i.e. they said they didn't know. Now, that was particularly interesting for me because having lived with it for so long, I just thought it was so bloody obvious to me. I thought, how could people not know that I was so distressed, so dysfunctional at times? I mean, trigger warning, I'd ended up in hospital twice. So I kind of just assumed that that my friends knew. And so when they were surprised and they said basically, why didn't you tell us? I was surprised that they were surprised, which I think makes two important points. I think one, we can't always assume that other people know what we're going through, but also what it proved, and this isn't necessarily a positive thing, is how good I'd become at putting on this brave face. And, I think that's what a lot of us do. We put on this brave face, we put on this smiley, happy face, or this face of courage and resilience, because that's what people encourage us to do. And that's not completely inappropriate, of course. We need to do that at times. But it can actually be dangerous in a way, because by putting on a brave face, I was reinforcing the myth in a sense, and in some ways also discouraging other people from helping me, because I was effectively telling them, even though I didn't know it necessarily, I was unconsciously telling them that I was okay when I wasn't. So But yeah, look, short story, I did get a very supportive response, and it's interesting, a number of people have continued to check in and at regular intervals, not necessarily the ones I would have predicted, which is interesting, but enough people have continued to check in and support me at regular intervals beyond my immediate family.
It's so interesting that you say that they were shocked, because you mustn't have felt that you were really trying to hide it. You mustn't have felt that, like a lot of people do, deliberately try to put that sort of that face on. And like you say, there are appropriate times to do that, but you mustn't have sort of had that overarching kind of idea in your mind that I've got to hide this and I've got to put on a brave face all the time. Did you feel as though you were able to sort of act how you felt, and that was part of the surprise, sort of when your friends and some family members were taken aback when you shared your story?
Well, no, I think I probably did actively try and hide it for a long time. I mean, remember, I'm extremely old, remember, so we're going back quite a few years now. I mean, we're in my, I guess, the onset of the worst periods in my, very late teens, early 20s. So, again, we're going back, again, this is before Beyond Blue, before Are You OK Day. So there really wasn't any open discussion about it. It seems almost strange now to think about that, but it just wasn't spoken about. So it wasn't a conscious thing of trying to hide it. It's just what people did. It's just what was expected, I suppose. So, but I guess to go back, I was trying to hide it in a way, and I guess I tried to hide it in different ways for different reasons at different times. So it was, and even one side. So initially there probably was some stigma. Initially there was some confusion. Initially, there was a lot of just not knowing what was going on. But even once I got over that and wasn't necessarily afraid or embarrassed of it, I still didn't speak about it for a while for different reasons. It's complicated. And I guess what it helped me, I understand very much from a first-person perspective what it's like for people. Even now when we're saying, come out, speak about it, it's still not always that easy, and it still can be confusing, and a lot of pieces need to come together and fall into place for people to feel comfortable to do that.
Yes, that's exactly right. And you take me back to my overriding challenge with my own mental health has been anxiety. From a very young age, I can look back to when I was 4 and identify sort of first symptoms. It wasn't identified till I was 24, and that was when I was severely depressed. And like you, I remember the day that I told my girlfriends I'd been suffering with depression, and we'd all gone our separate ways. We were all working by that stage. We weren't sort of in each other's lives every day. And I had this worry that they wouldn't believe me, because my normal personality, my normal temperament is what you see and hear today. I'm usually very upbeat and positive, and so to be hit with depression and it absolutely knocks you for a 6, to the point where I couldn't get out of bed, I couldn't go to work, and I really didn't care if I didn't wake up. That was how severe it was, which is, that's what depression can do to you. I didn't think they'd believe me, was sort of my fear when I shared it, that they'd go, who, you depressed? But again, like you say, this was in the time before Beyond Blue, which I ended up working for Beyond Blue. I left teaching to go and work for Beyond Blue in 2001, and they really only started up in the year 2000. So it's we've come a long way, but like you say, it's still not something that everybody's comfortable sharing. Even in their own circles, let alone in a more public forum.
Yeah, look, I can definitely relate to that. And although I don't know if I necessarily thought about it in the same way, as in, will they believe me? I think it was part of the reason it was a shock for a lot of people, was that I'd been, all through school, I'd been, I think ostensibly anyway, relatively popular, relatively successful academically, played in the sort of top sporting teams. I was, the head prefect of the school, and then even at university, even though there was a few stumbles along the way, I'd got good marks and then got a good job and then professionally and in almost every regard from the outside, I would have been seen as successful. But in my mind, was a roaring imposter syndrome and severe depressive thinking that it was I could get an Olympic gold medal in turning positives into negatives or discounting positives anyway. So so I guess again, I can fully understand why ostensible trappings of success don't always translate into people's subjective experiences. So certainly did in my case, and they still don't to some extent.
No, and that's the thing. And so how do you go with managing your mental health and your work and family life? What works for you? I guess I'd love to know what makes a difference for you to be able to manage your depression. And I'd also love you to take us back to sort of when you first were able to get help that made a difference for you.
Yeah, well, I'll start with the second question, I suppose. When I first, again, I guess just going back and just to help people understand, it was a completely different, it was a different world in mental health space. So getting help was a bit of a mystery, really. I mean, we just didn't really know where to look. So I guess the first time I got help, and again, apologies to the listeners that might be triggered, but it really only happened after I attempted to end my life the first time. So. Not surprising, I've been struggling for a long time before that, but we just didn't understand. I had loving, caring parents and even good friends, I suppose, but just no one knew what was going on. And again, I hit it probably so, but that was clearly a crisis point and a point at which people realised, and I probably realised how significant things were. So from that point, and again, I was extremely lucky to, even though I was living out of home at the time, I'd finished school, but I had very supportive parents who tried the best they could, even without knowing much what to do. So to be honest, it took me probably 3 trials at different psychiatrist, counsellor, therapist type people to find the right one. So the first one was just a contact of a content from my dad's, I think, who was a counsellor. And look, in some ways it was helpful. It was the first time I'd ever talked to someone, I suppose. So in that sense, it was a massive relief. I can still remember actually this sort of unburdening, this weight coming off my shoulders, just having someone to listen. But with all due respect to her, she was a fairly, I don't know how knowledgeable the audience is, but she was a non-directive counsellor, so she listened very well. She was very empathic, but she didn't really offer me anything. And for me personally, I needed something a bit more prescriptive, I suppose, a bit more structured. So that helped for a bit, but not quite enough. And I'm boiling a lot of it down into very short summary, I suppose.
Yeah.
We then went to a psychiatrist, which was an absolute disaster. And I'm not saying all psychiatrists are, but it just definitely wasn't right. In fact, it was quite damaging. It was quite traumatizing in some ways. I won't go into the detail, but that was very unpleasant. And then, again, it took a few years later, I eventually found a clinical psychologist whose approach, which is what I went on to specialise in, was cognitive behaviour therapy, CBT. Without overstating the significance of it, it saved my life. She saved my life. It was just massively incredibly helpful. Look, again, I know different approaches work for different people, but CBT for me at that time was just perfect. And so it helped me incredibly. It helped me personally. It also helped me find my career in a way, indirectly. And it just gave me the practical strategies I needed at that time and still utilised to some extent to get through what I was going through. So that was, that was over the course of a couple of years. And then since then, I've seen a number of different people. I still see a clinical psychologist on a regular basis. But over the years, that's been on and off for different reasons, I suppose. And, and I've dabbled in other approaches, particularly mindfulness and ACT, acceptance commitment therapy. So, but for me, still, CBT is probably, with a bit of ACT and mindfulness thrown in, is probably the most helpful approach. So they're the sorts of things that still help me today. A couple of the other big things that I still find very helpful. So exercise is very, very helpful for me. I exercise almost every day, and for me, that's not just for the physical benefits, but for the psychological benefits, the mental health benefits. So I find exercise as probably one of the most effective antidepressants, stress busters, and I've done that on and off mostly on for quite a while now. I meditate on a regular basis, and I find that helpful. I could still, I do it pretty much every day. I'd probably like to do it for slightly longer periods, I think, would be helpful, but that's very important. The other probably most helpful thing, which not as good as that I'd like to be, and particularly when my depression hits, I struggle, but is reaching out and talking to other people. As well as having had very supportive and loving parents, I've now had and had for 20-something years now, a very supportive and loving wife. But the biggest problem for me when my depression hits is I withdraw, even from her. However, when I can reach out and ask her, when I talk to her and I've got a few very good friends, then that's definitely helpful. I just, I struggle to do it during the really dark times, which is when I need it the most. So they're probably the main things. I mean, finding a meaningful career has been incredibly helpful for me. I mean, my work has been therapeutic in many ways. And more recently, or on top of that, the charitable work I do with the youth mental health charity has been very important. So I'm now at a stage in my life and career where I can give a lot, which is very fulfilling. So yeah, they're probably the main things, I guess.
Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr. Jodi Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time. Hi there, Dr. Jodi Richardson here. Do you have a child who's feeling anxious about starting school? A tween who's transitioning to high school, or perhaps a teen who's changing campuses in 2024 or changing schools altogether? Transitions can be especially hard for our kids and teens because they go hand in hand with uncertainty. There are just so many unknowns. But what we know for sure is that uncertainty drives anxiety. And so if you have a child or teen who's feeling anxious about school for any reason, it's perfectly understandable. Left unchecked, anxiety around school can lead to a morning off here or a day off there, and these absences can escalate to school refusal, which is why I've created a new online program for parents called Well, Hello School Anxiety. The program will run live over 4 weeks starting in mid-January, where you'll learn all about the brain, anxiety, and how to identify it, exactly what to do and say when anxiety around school shows up, powerful anxiety management strategies. You'll create a custom plan for your child's unique situation. You'll learn how to enrol the school's help to support your child through the school gate each morning, and so much more. You can learn more about this program and secure your place by heading to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and clicking through from the top of the homepage. I can't wait to work with you and help make school transitions in 2024 smoother and less stressful for the whole family.